vulnerability. And the vulnerabilities are the things that the white hat hackers are looking for, to be able to help us with those things. So we have to have all of these things working together in order to make a network a network. Let me get him marked here. Try to keep up with this. So we're going to talk about some other things. Some of them are hardware configurations. Some of them are, well, actually they're all hardware configurations. And where do we do different things on the network? So the whole chapter 8, and this one's moderately long. We may or may not finish it tonight. The others, the remaining ones, are moderately short, so we don't have any kind of a time crunching. You're still going to get lab time, and please take advantage of the lab time. How network security components, the components themselves, prevent unwelcome users and network traffic. Local and network authentication systems. And then to harden the networks and promote secure practices when we get into policies. What are we going to do with policies? How are we going to do those things? The first thing, well, this is the module itself, access control list. The first thing is going to be access control list. Then a little bit about firewalls, intrusion detection, intrusion prevention systems, and then physical security methods. And what we do with these things and where we apply these things can be significant in the way that they help us in the security world. The first thing I have here, I think, is ACL, an access control list. And I've got a blank here because I kind of like to scrawl, and hopefully you'll be able to read my scrawl through it. And when you're studying and taking notes, there's some, and this is me, and I think I read this somewhere, some benefit to actually writing, not typing, but writing with a stubby pencil and piece of paper, writing things down so that we can do these things. So an access control list filters or limits. We'll say it limits, it filters. Filters. Who gets where? And we're going to do this based on TCP and IP. So we're going to use all of that stuff that we talked about. TCP, and we talked about ports. Ports represent services, so what are we going to allow users to get there? IP, specific addresses that or network subnets, portions of IP networks we can either permit or deny. In an access control list, we can either permit it or deny it. Permit or deny. And we have to say what we're going to do with these things. When we get done, we're going to have at the end what's called an implicit deny. Implicit, M-P-L-I-C-I-T, implicit deny, which says that anything that we don't permit gets denied. So, and you can, if you're using Linux, you can actually establish either an implicit permit or an implicit deny. Implicit deny denies everything we don't permit. To me, that's safer. The implicit permit permits everything we don't deny. So when we do those things. So an access control list is an ordered list. That's the first thing it is, an ordered list. An ordered list. So it's a list, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, of either permits or denies when we do these things. It's read from the top down. So top down. So that when we have these permits and denies, the packet comes in here, TCP/IP, and goes into the first statement. Does it apply to me? If it's yes, we execute that and don't go any further. If not, we go to the next statement, and that's what this is showing here. The first test, yes, it's either permit or deny. If it's a no, go to the second test. If it's a permit or deny, we will do that. If it doesn't apply, we go until we get to the bottom. When we get to the bottom, we have that deny that we don't see in the configuration statements, but is there. So it's an ordered list, goes from the top down, reads the statements that it does. It applies, A-P-L-I-E-S, applies the first thing that it sees that applies. Yeah, the first thing it applies it executes and doesn't look any farther. So order that these things are in is significant. The order that they're in is significant. We'll try to do some, what happens with that. When we add statements, this is one of the kind of oddities, and this is when we add, it's added at the bottom, which means that we have a real issue. And if we were in a Cisco class, I'd say, okay, they're added at the bottom, but what you would do is copy and paste your access control list, copy it to a notepad, and then whenever you make changes to the text file, the notepad text file, and you can copy and paste it back into your router configuration. And you can do that. You can copy and paste in router configurations to do those things. It's a two-step process. Two-step process. Because when we write the access control list, we just write the access control list. We then, on the devices that we have, we apply it and we say, okay, use this access control list on this interface. And when we apply it, we either apply it as going into the router or coming out of the router on the interface itself. So it's either an inbound interface or an outbound interface. So up here we have the incoming packet, first test. If it's a yes, permit, it goes on to do its thing. If it's a no, if it's a deny, then it goes to the bit bucket. It just goes away when we do those things. If it doesn't apply, we go to the second statement, to the third statement on down the line. If nothing applies, we go to the implicit deny. Implicit deny, which is then going to say, okay, you can't go anywhere. What used to be significant and is not anymore, we can have one per protocol, because the protocol that we use now is IP. One protocol per interface, per direction. And when we say we apply it on the interface, we can write an access control list. We can apply it on multiple interfaces if we want to. So what this is saying is that on each interface we could have two access control lists for IP, one going in and one going out. So two are available on it. We have the implicit deny. I'm looking at my notes to be sure that, and I will miss something. Can be inbound or outbound. The more specific things at the top. Specific, S-P-E-C-I-F-I-C, at the top of the list. I will give you an example. One of the differences between you and me is, I've been doing it longer, but I've just screwed up more than you have and had to go back and fix it. And that's when you really learn the system, when you mess something up and you've got to go back and fix it. So we had an individual who was abusing their internet privileges, falling in love, doing it for love letters, not doing their job or whatever else. So instead of, after counseling, instead of just making the person go away, because they were pretty productive when they weren't in love or lust or whatever it was, decided that we would just deny them access to the internet. We have an IP address, so we went in and did deny this IP, deny the IP address to do these things, access list, whatever it was, and applied it to the interface that they were on. And then applied it. Well, something wrong here, because the internet went down. The whole network went down because of this implicit deny. We need at least one permit, because if we don't have a permit, and then does the first test no, this no, and this one, what did the first test apply? Was a no for most people, was a yes for that one individual, and theirs was then to deny. Were no statements after that. So the next thing, we would have got down here to the third. We didn't have anything else. So the next thing was an implicit deny. So what we have to have is at least one permit statement in an access control list in order to make it work. The more specific things at the top, if we were going to do that deny with that individual, and if we did the permit first, and it would be a permit any, to permit or even permit the IP addressing of these things, and then after that we did the deny, they would come in and say, oh, it says permit. So they'd go onto the internet. They would never get to the deny. So the more specific commands, the more specific restrictions, the more specific permits or denies need to be at the top of the list when we do these lists. So access control lists, and this says Telnet FTP. We can write these lists using the source IP address, or we can write these things using TCP port numbers. And let me look at these for a second, then we'll look at an example. I think I can get an example of this thing. So this is the kind of the slide that is much cleaner and prettier than the scrawl that I did, but the packet comes in to the device. Let's see, we've got our spotlight here. It comes in, the packet comes in. Does the statement 1 match? If it's yes, is it a permit? Then the destination is forwarded on out of the device, and the device is going to be a router or a firewall that we use for these things. If it's not a permit, if it's a no, it goes down here, the packet's dropped. If the first statement doesn't match, the next statement, does it match? If it's a yes or a no. If it's a no, does the third one? No. And when we get to the end, we get the packet drop because of our implicit deny for it. So the access control lists, a mechanism used to control the flow of traffic. It's used to control access to resources. Who can get to which resources on these networks? Identify traffic which can either be permitted or denied across the network. Allow you to define a specific group of traffic and apply the condition based on a predetermined criteria. And then applied using, and this is for Cisco, obviously, the Cisco IOS statements on the router interface. CompTIA is vendor neutral, vendor agnostic, although they have tended, just looking at all of the practice questions that I see, they've tended more toward the Cisco command, the Cisco processes for these things. Applied is either an inbound or an outbound rule on the interface, and then validate each packet to determine whether the packet has been blocked or allowed to pass. And that's a pretty significant statement there. Validate each packet to determine whether it is allowed to pass or not. That means it's going to take some processing power in order to do that. If we have a big long list, it's going to have to, the router is going to have to look at that entire list if the whatever's going to happen is at the bottom of the list. So ordering the statements, again, can be significant in these things. And down here at the bottom, we're going to have the implicit deny for these things. Two types of access control lists. I don't know that this is significant for Network Plus, but might as well get it in here. We've got a standard list, which just uses the source IP address, and then the extended list, which is going to allow us to use the IP address and the TCP port so that we can use it to control access to specific resources that are on the network. And this is kind of a, I guess, summary slide of these things. More specific rules need to be at the top. The list is applied from the top down. We have to have at least one permit statement. We have the implicit deny. After we write it, we've got to apply it. And then we can have one list per protocol, per interface, per direction when we do these things. These are the kind of, we throw in the access control list, a list of rules. A list of rules, a list of what can happen to data on that particular interface. And this says to engineering, we can permit or deny whatever we want to do. The thing that you really do have to be careful of is where you apply it in some instances. If it's just a going through from one to the other, not a big deal. But if we have other resources out here, other interfaces on this router, and this would be a router, routers are always drawn as circles, then where we apply it, if I have a network back here and if I apply it in, yeah, I have denied maybe access to the internet over here, but I've also denied access to all these other resources that are available that maybe should be available to the user. So where we apply the access control list can make a difference. If we only wanted to prevent them from going in this direction, we would need to apply it outbound on this interface. So not only the order that you write the statements in, the order that they're applied in, but where you enforce the access control list can be significant. Restrict access to network resources, block access to the subnet or networks, and we can group them. We can do individual addresses, or we can group them, or we can use individual host IP addresses and port numbers. And we're not going to use host names. We're not going to do DNS resolutions. We're going to use IP addresses in this thing when we do these. Restrict remote access to connections. We could do that. An inbound list going to the web server, for instance. If we had a web server in the DMZ, and we're going to talk about DMZs a little bit later, what we would do is permit everybody that's on the internet to get to port 80 and port 443, because we want everybody to be able to get to our web server and be able to buy our products. So we would permit those, and then we would not allow all of the other resources or services to be access, but maybe we want to be able to do a remote configuration or remote management of it. So then we're going to have to permit either Telnet or SSH. We're going to have to permit port 23 or port 22, and we could go that to a specific IP address, be very specific about it, so that we allow the administrator and only the administrator's computer IP address to get to that port number to be able to do management of the device. So we can do lots of things with them, and we have the inbound and the outbounds for these things. The first rule on this one, deny sales from surfing. The second rule, permit everybody else to surf. So first rule, deny the sales group from the internet or from surfing the internet. We might allow them to get to specific resources and other methods that we'll talk about. We might allow them to get to only specific sites when we do that thing. The second rule, allow everybody else in the company to get to the internet or to surf the internet. First rule, deny sales. Second rule, permit to surf. Packets that do not match firewall rules are dropped automatically, or access control list rules. This particular slide refers to an access control list that was applied at a firewall. And we're going to ensure that each ACL has a permit rule. If you don't have a permit, you just denied everything, because the default policy is to deny. Let's see, first permit, second deny sales from surfing, permit all to surf. This one is backwards if you look at that, and that's why I thought about taking it out. So I don't want to do that, but you don't want to do that. The first rule says, hey, everybody gets to go to the internet. Second rule says, okay, sales, you can't go. But you already told me I could go, so sales is going to go to the internet, because the first rule says that they can get to the internet. What I say we do, and let me see if I can get my packet tracer going here real quick, is to go through, and you'll have to suffer with me while we write. I don't think I've got one configured. While we write the access control list, the packet tracer will start. And that's not a bad thing to do, I guess. ACL demo. Yeah, this one will work. This one will work. What I've got here is a simple little network, and the amber lights here are spanning tree, checking for. We talked about spanning tree, layer 2, checking for layer 2 loops. It's going to take a minute to do that. What I want to do is check my server here and see which services are running. I've got HTTP and HTTPS. What I'm going to do is permit one of these guys to get to port 80 and permit the other one to get to 443. And anything that I don't permit is going to be denied, just so that we can see what goes on, and then we will apply it. Okay, so I can go to this guy and we will write the access list, and we can have either this one we're going to have an extended list, because we're going to use something other than the source IP address. We're going to go into the ports that we're going to do for this thing. So I need the 2.2 and 1.2, 1.3 and 2.2, and I will go back and look at that because I really don't do a very good job of doing those. So we'll do configure this thing, and we'll do IP access list extended, and I'll just call it my list. So now I go in here and permit 192, or permit in this case TCP host 192.168.1.2, the source to go to host 192.168.2. See, I told you I'd forget. 2.2, 2.2, and then equal to port 80. So we'll let this guy go to HTTP. And the other one, what was it? It was 1.3, right? 1.3 to get to port 443. Normally, just to be safe, I would then probably do a deny. If I did a permit after this, any, it would look, 2.2 would come in and say, hey, I want to go to 443. Or I want to go to 80. 2.2 would come in and say, or 1.2 would come in and say, I want to go to port 80. Or 443. I'll get these things right in a second. 1.3 would come in and say, I want to go to port 80. The first one doesn't apply. The second one doesn't apply. But then if I permitted everybody else to get there, it would be permitted under that one because I haven't denied it anything to start with. Or I could do a deny here, but I don't have to do a deny here because we have the implicit deny. So now I need to go to, and this one, since I don't have anything else on here, I can apply it on this interface, gigabit 01 inbound, so that when interface gig 0/1, now 0/1, I did something weird, and then we'll do what we do, IP, it's an IP access group, and it was my list, right? My list, and we'll do it inbound. And if you're doing Cisco, I can see that I have an access list to do these things. So I have this one, my list I applied. There are some other ones here that are not applied. They're there. They're just kind of sitting there waiting to be applied. We can have them written available until we do the application. So let me be sure that we didn't apply it. One of the other ones we did permit, let's see, IP access group. So we didn't. I just wanted to be sure that I didn't have multiple lists applied to that interface. So one of these guys should be able to get to port 80. This thing's got a little web browser here, so we'll go to HTTP 192.168.2.2, and I don't remember which was which. But this one doesn't seem to be able to get to the HTTP portion of it. So my request timed out, and I may have done this wrong. The hazard of live demos is that you mess them up. And it doesn't seem to be liking me. So I can go in here and actually see if this thing is working. I may have some other ones. Show access lists. And this says 44 matches to permit 192.168.2 to 192.1.2 to 2.2. 192.168.2.2, 192.168.1.2. It should have actually allowed me to do that. But it says it timed out, didn't it? let's see if 1.3 can get to am I going, did I write them wrong? I have a real propensity to do that. 192, 168, 1.2, 192, 168, 2.2 equal to 44. It says that we have matches here. And permit 12 matches. The access control list appears to be working. My simulator appears to be being a pain, and that's another issue that happens sometimes with these things, that they just don't want to play. Let's see if we can ping 192.168.2.2. Host unreachable. That means that my implicit deny is working with this thing. So, you know, theoretically, I'll look at it here when we're on the break and see what I have done wrong, just so that you can see what an access, well, you can see what it looks like, the way you apply it, and what it's supposed to do. But I would like to make it work for you. The next thing we talked about, Ethernet has this problem that all you got to do is walk in and plug in a system and you're in trouble. And then we had the question tonight was, we had this guy that plugged in his wireless router because he wanted to do more stuff and created a rogue DHCP server. We can filter what goes on the network. Here's another demo that hopefully this one will work. That goes on the network by configuring port security. And I did, I think, already configure port security on this thing. This says that we are allowed one IP address on each of the interfaces. And then if we have more than one, it's going to shut it down. I want to see if I can get some IP addresses in here, and we'll ping 192.168.1.255. Ping the broadcast address for this. Well, I've got two addresses down here, so if this thing is going to work, eventually this one should shut down. And I may have another one that is going to be a pain for me. Let's see. So this says that we have, and it didn't get to the one, it only got the one address. What we can configure, I want to be sure that I got the addresses. We have this thing called Sticky, and I've seen this in some test banks. What we do by using the Sticky command is we know that the MAC address table, as the addresses come in, they get put into the MAC address table. If we configure port security in Sticky, not only do they get put in the MAC address table, they get assigned to the configuration file so that they're going to stay with the system. So I didn't get this one. I've got two of them down here. I'm only supposed to be able to have one. So I've got a 52 and a 53. Let's see if we can make this thing do what it's supposed to do. 50, 52. Well, maybe it's pinging itself. Let's try 53. And it's still pinging itself. But you notice it's pinging itself because it's going on the hub. Shut down the port because we're only allowed to have one MAC address on each port. So port security will shut those things down. What we had happen for a while was users would come in and plug in their laptops. 192.168.1.200 would plug in their laptops. The problem with that is you don't know what's on that laptop. And it's on Fast Ethernet 03. You don't know what's on that laptop. Has it got a virus? What's going on with it? So if I plug in my laptop to one that's configured for port security, shuts the port down. I don't have the issue anymore of that happening. The other one we talked about, and I need to get out of some of this stuff, and then we'll take a break. Let me put my good guy back in here, and it's not going to come back up. I have to go back and tell it to come back up. It's still down. I have to go back in here and configure this thing. Let's see. Shut it down and do a no shut down. And now my port is back up. I need a machine here that is configured for DHCP, and one of them I thought was. Yeah, this one is configured to get a DHCP address, and it's got a DHCP address 1.50. We can go in here and do a ipconfig and config, and we have the address on it. We can do an ipconfig /release and then a /renew, and hopefully we get our IP address. We got 54 this time. And then it skipped the ones that were the static, so it appears that it actually is doing what it's supposed to do, is check to be sure that to see if those other addresses are in use before it configures them. I said that what we can do is to configure the router so that our switch won't allow a rogue DHCP server. So it's IP DHCP snooping, and it turns it on the switch itself. I have a DHCP server here, and this guy was the one that had the DHCP address, right? The DHCP address. So we'll go back to the desktop and see if we can get our address again. So we'll do a release here and a renew, and I'm waiting, and I'm waiting, and I'm waiting. What DHCP snooping, the thing that we did, the request failed, we can still send the discover message, and it goes to the DHCP server, but it's not allowed to send an offer. But the problem that we have with that now is that our DHCP server doesn't work. It's on Fast Ethernet 0.1. We can go in and configure that interface, Fast Ethernet 0/1, to be trusted. So it's IP DHCP snooping trust. Once I do that, once I say, hey, I can have a DHCP server on that port, and it'll probably make me a liar, but let's see if we can get the IP address again. And yeah, we got the 1.54 address back, so we can do that. The things that we talk about on this slide, it's got two significant things, and I think if you look in the objectives, it talks about these two things, port security and DHCP snooping specifically. And then MAC filtering, port security, we did MAC filtering with port security by using that sticky command. And the sticky command is the one that's going to do it. It allows the MAC addresses to be automatically detected just like it is in a standard switch. It then sticks them to the ports and allows them to be saved so that if the switch gets restarted, they're still there. They don't have to go back and do a new discover. We configured that, and once we configured that, we didn't really have any problem with students plugging in their laptops after a while, after they figured it out, to the switches, because it's a dangerous situation. Somebody just plugs into your network. What we did have a problem with was faculty sometimes doing that. Anyhow, we're at break time, and we'll continue with these things, but port security, hopefully it makes a little sense. MAC filtering, yes, we can do that. We can specify which MAC addresses are allowed on each port on the switch. And then DHCP snooping to prevent the rogue DHCP servers. So if there are questions, let me have them. Otherwise, let's take a break until 10 past the hour. one of them was applied. We have one of them applied on an inbound interface, one on an outbound interface, and they were doing the opposite. The one that was on the inbound that was permitting 443 was permitting 80 for that address on the outbound. So they were at odds with each other. But if we go to this guy and open up his browser, and let's see if he can get to secure 192.168.2.2, and sure enough, it looks like he can't. Give it a second here to time out. So it timed out, and let's see if he can get to HTTP port 80. Port 80, and we can get there with port 80. The other one, HTTPS, should be able to get to it, right? Unless I made a typo. 68.2.2, and he can get there, and he shouldn't be able to get to port 80 because of the implicit deny. I just want to go back and say, yep, they do work. Access control lists, and we can be kind of precise about what we allow them to do. We can go down to the service, to the IP address and service, to determine what each of them is allowed to do. Some other things here are loop protection, BPDU guard. We have in spanning tree takes 50 seconds for something to start up. It's checking for loops. If we've got computers plugged into the ports, there's no need to check for loop because they're not going to create loops. They're going to be called end devices. And we're going to configure something called port fast, turn the ports on fast, port fast, in order to allow the ports to come up immediately. But the BPDU guard here is just in case somebody plugs something in to a port that's configured with port fast. It's going to shut the port down so that we can't create a loop in the system. Unidirectional links. A unidirectional link is usually something that's going to be a fiber issue. Because we have two different fibers, one transmit and one receive. And the unidirectional is that either the transmit works and the receive doesn't. Something happened, and I heard one time in a course call it backcode failure, where a backcode cuts into your fiber and cuts into only half of it. Root guard is going to prevent a switch from becoming the root device, the root switch, the root bridge, and we talked about that. When we were talking about spanning tree protocol. BPDU filter filters the BPDUs. Flood guard, we talked about a SYN attack yesterday, denial of service for SYN, where we just kept getting half open connections. We got SYNs, and we send the SYNAC, but we never get an acknowledgement. It's called a half open connection. Eventually the buffer fills up because they're pretty small. What the flood guard does is there are a couple of techniques. One, it can do the acknowledgement, send the ACK, and then if it doesn't happen for real, it drops the connection. It can start recycling or dropping the oldest half-open connections until we stop it. But we can prevent or mitigate, I guess, the SYN floods, the half-open ports, to allow users to still be able to connect to the devices themselves. So a number of things that we can do with switches. Port security shuts down the port. There are other things. We can just drop the packets too, which drives you crazy because you can't get there and you don't see any indication that the port shut down, but the switch can just drop the packets for the individuals without shutting down the port. I think the shutdown port is, and that's just me, we liked it because it was obvious to everybody what had happened. The MAC filtering and port security, it says common in a WAP. It's common to use in a wireless access point or a wireless router. Lots of MAC filtering goes on there. We can also use it with port security in a wired switch. DHCP snooping prevented the rogue DHCP server. So different things to help us at the switch, and anything that you can prevent at layer 2, you don't have to worry about at layer 3. So we talk about firewalls here for a few minutes. We have two types of firewalls: a host firewall, IP tables on Linux, and then the Windows firewall on Windows systems to control what can happen to us or connect to us from us on the host or on the network firewall. A firewall is a little bit more sophisticated device than the router. We configured a router for filtering. Does a lot the same thing the older firewalls do. The new firewalls work at the application layer, and they are very precise. They can filter specifically and correct things, specific applications. If you were using a piece of software to connect remotely to your devices, and there's one called TeamViewer, we could prevent that. So if I wanted to start TeamViewer on my machine inside the network and then go home and connect to it, I can prevent that with a firewall. I used to do a DHCP spoofing lab in the Security Plus class, and it wasn't anything dramatic, but we spoofed so that if you typed in google.com, you went to Yahoo. If you typed in yahoo.com, you went to Google. And that worked great until the headquarters activity, who got all of our traffic, got a new Barracuda firewall and configured all of the applications. And then when the packet came in, it did the deep packet inspection and said, "Oh, you've made a mistake. Let me fix that for you." So my spoofing didn't work anymore because the firewall broke it. These things can get very, very sophisticated now. They don't just filter on IP address and port number. They filter on what is actually in the application layer of what goes on. So we host-based Windows firewall, IP tables in Linux to do these things, to configure these things, network-based and host-based firewalls. The network-based routed firewall segments, network VPN, endpoint filters, packets with the access control list. An access control list is a router with an access control list is a basic firewall. We used to use, and we'll talk about DMZs, we used to use a firewall, a physical firewall, and a filter router in order to protect the network. We had a DMZ that will allow that. The other one there is a virtual firewall, and I put that image down at the bottom right. It's for virtual computers, for virtual NICs. You've seen, I think I've run the virtual machine for, at least once when we looked at the DHCP and DNS. So it had a NIC, and then we could use filtering a NIC, a virtual NIC, which shared the resources of the physical NIC that's on the machine. But on these things, we have the virtual firewall to protect the devices to going to the virtual machine, just like a physical firewall would in our network, except it is in the hypervisor, the software that runs on the virtual machine itself, or allows the virtual machine to access the resources. So in these things, firewalls, a network firewall is typically going to be a hardware firewall, a piece of equipment that we put at the edge of our network and configure it as certain endpoints. We could use it as a VPN endpoint if we wanted to let somebody, the traveling salesman, connect to the network. We could do a client and have them connect to the firewall and then get onto the network. We can use it to filter what traffic can come into the network, filter what traffic can go out of the network. And filtering going out sometimes is as important as filtering coming in, because we talked about zombie nets. If our network, heaven forbid, got infected and had zombies, if we had the filtering going out, we might be able to prevent our machines from participating in the bot army when we did that. So these host firewall is typically going to be software to do those things. Windows Firewall, there are other commercial ones. A lot of the antivirus softwares combine an IDS, IPS, firewall, antivirus software. in them. So we can have a host firewall, typically going to be software, and a network firewall is typically going to be a piece of hardware to do these things. And this is just, you can have firewalls within your network if you really need that kind of protection and segregation of resources and filtering of resources and what can go where, when. The devices themselves, originally they were packet filters. And if you think about that, when you do that, packet filters, okay, I permit my network to go out through port 80. I permit my network to go to HTTP devices. Firewall is a two-way device. What happens when it comes back? We would then have to open up a block of, and usually the well-known addresses, the ones below 1023 and below, to allow them back into the network. They were a straightforward IP filter network. Stateless network is what they're called. Now we have stateful filtering, and they produce what's called a state table. And a state table records the state of the connection. In other words, it says that if I permit my users to go to port 80, and this has the source IP address, the source port, the socket, the destination IP address, the destination port, a socket, and it says it's an established connection. That means that I started the conversation. So when the answer comes back to the state table, to the device with the state table, the firewall, it's going to allow the answer to come back in without me having to do other configurations. And the ones that we have, the firewalls that we have on our wireless routers do that. When you start it up, it allows everything out and doesn't allow anything in generally. And it's going to allow the searches, the connections that we made from inside the network, allow the answers to come back to us. So a state table, stateful filtering, stateful firewalls allow us to do that without having to configure access for every resource that we want to allow into the network. And if you think about it, that'd be a tough job to do that. What we wind up doing is opening up more of the ports than we really probably would feel safe with, particularly in today's world. So this is the stateful process here. One, does my access policy allow this packet to go through, going over from C1 on the right to the service on the left? And the answer was going to be yes, we would permit it. It goes to, this packet match and entry in the state table goes to H1. When it goes out, we get an entry in the state table. We have the source IP, the destination IP, the layer 4. It's a TCP protocol. Source port X1, destination port Y1. We have to have the socket here, the IP address, and the port number. TCP flags, this would be a SYN, so we have the sequence number and then the ACK. When it comes back, it says, does it match an entry in the state table? Did I initiate this connection? If the answer is yes, it allows it in. If the answer is no, it's going to reject that. This is just another state table look that prevents spoofing, prevent connections that we don't want. If we allow port 80 stateless, in a stateless, we may get harmful traffic in. And a lot of the attacks now are starting to come across or through or with HTTP or HTTPS, preferably HTTPS, because it's going to be encrypted. If it's encrypted, we can't read it because we don't have the encryption key. So a lot of things that maybe are encrypted might sneak through port 443 simply because they are encrypted and they can't really be read. Same reason we have to have that unencrypted IP address on the header for all of the VPN when we do encryption, when we encrypt the packet, because it can't be read unless we have something that is unencrypted on the outside of this thing. Application layer firewalls. I've kind of talked about them. The one on the left, packet filter firewall, it shows it at IP, incoming and outgoing traffic. It uses TCP as well as IP addresses. The one that I did, the extended, used both the IP address and the port number that we are going to allow or not allow for these things. So in the packet filter, the traffic is filtered based on the specified rules, including the source destination IP address, packet type, port number. Unknown traffic is only allowed up to level 3 of the stack when we do these things. Application traffic is filtered based on specified application rules. People don't use them anymore, but back in the day, AOL Instant Messenger was a big deal. Some people use some of the messenger software in their network. These application layer softwares are so specific that they can allow AOL and deny Google Messenger and Yahoo Messenger at the application layer. So the sophistication, the cost is going to be obviously higher, but the protection is also going to be higher with these things. Unknown traffic is allowed up to the top of the network stack with these things. So how much are we going to allow, how much traffic? Packet filtering, IP and TCP, the NIC, the direction, the data IP address, and the ports, and that's why I say TCP. We'll say IP ports, IP addresses and ports for packet filtering. Circuit level, the session software, the SYN, the ACK, the SYN-ACK. The session layer was the one that established the session between the applications. So, and that was where we get into the socket with the port numbers, with the application that we're trying to permit or deny with these things. And then the application firewalls, application layer firewalls, look at the application itself. What's in it? Is it one that's permitted? The configuration, and it took a while to learn, for them to learn, and we could see it when stuff would be not permitted, and then all of a sudden it would be. It took a while for them to learn how to manage that particular piece of software, or hardware. But when they were able to do it, it was very precise on what it allowed and what it didn't allow, which sometimes didn't like because we wanted to do things that they didn't want us to do. But the application level, the session ID, and the network address to do these things. So this is showing the packet going in. What do? We can filter it at the network layer, the session layer, the port numbers that we're using, or we can go to the application layer, HTTP, the URLs. The next thing that we want to talk about here, we talk about a DMZ, a demilitarized zone. We have in the security world of the network world, we have the trusted local area network. That's our private network. For all of you who are at the facilities at Jacksonville or Colorado Springs or Dallas, you're in the private network. You're in the trusted network. You're in the protected network, different terms that you will hear. You're behind the firewall. We might have something out here called an untrusted LAN, and the untrusted network is actually out here. The internet is the untrusted, but in here we have, and this says Bastion Host. The Bastion Host is a hardened secure host. Hardened secure host, what does that mean? If I got a web server out here, then the web service is the only thing that's running on it. And I'm going to have antivirus and all the other protections that would be available to it. It's going to probably have a host firewall running on it, as well as filtering, and this doesn't show it, but what I was talking about, what we did, we would have a router out here to filter stuff going into the DMZ, and then we would have the firewall to prevent everything from going into the private network except the sessions that came from the private network. But the Bastion Host hardened sources that are exposed to the untrusted internet. Specific services running on these things, and only the services running on them that we require to be out here. Yeah, we would like to get everybody from the internet to go to our web server, because whatever we're doing with it, we've got it out there so that it provides information, or the ability. A lot of people are selling stuff on the internet. Different things that we're going to do, or the products, advertise the products. It may be there for the employees so that they can check stuff from inside the network out here and from outside the network. We don't really, and we could have one sitting here, and we could punch a hole in the firewall and allow it to go to port 80 on a specific IP address. We'll really want outsiders on our private network if we can absolutely avoid it. So the DMZ with the Bastion host is a way to avoid that. We have this semi-secure area out here. It says it's untrusted. This is going to be a secure area back here. We hope it's secure anyway. And then we'll have maybe semi-secure here, semi-secure back here, so that everybody can get to some of the resources on the network to allow them to do those things. And the Bastion hosts are the systems that are hardened, and the way we harden is we shut down everything that it doesn't need. We minimize the resources that are available. A couple of other things that you would do on this: you would have it have a minimum amount of memory, and a minimum amount of storage, a minimum amount of hardware storage or hard drive storage. Reason is, I don't know if I told this story or not, but our headquarters activity had an issue at 2 o'clock in the morning one night. They had a full pipe going out, full bandwidth, full pipe. It was before we had 20 gig and 30 gig lines, but it was pretty for the day, a lot of activity. What had happened was they had a lot of storage. They had a lot of storage out here in the DMZ. What had happened, the web server was out here. That day, actually, I think that the webmaster wanted to update the web server, so they punched a hole, port 21 FTP. Port 21, remember, FTP is an insecure protocol to do those things, to allow the webmaster to upload the web site update. And then the administrator gets busy. He also allowed anonymous access. And anonymous means you don't have to have a password. If you can find it, you can connect to it. And he forgot about it. So during the night, one of those scans that take place, and there are a lot of scans that take place, somebody in Germany found this open port 21 and uploaded a movie to it. And it wasn't a pornographic movie, it was just a movie. It was illegal, of course, because it was an illegal copy. But uploaded a movie to it and then shared that information on one of the sharing sites. So things like that can happen to you. It's easy to do. You need to monitor what goes on, what kind of traffic do we have. If the traffic hadn't been monitored, there's no telling how long that could have stayed there. But traffic being monitored saw that there was an anomaly. Once the anomaly was there, investigate, and then kind of do the backtrack to see what happened to the system. But the Bastion hosts hardened hardware, hardened servers, I guess, in the DMZ. DMZ, I call it a semi-protected area. It is still an untrusted, maybe a semi-trusted, but we limit what resources are available in it. This one was a firewall, and this just shows it coming into the untrusted LAN, just sitting out there. You can do that. That's kind of dangerous. Depending on what you do. We set a NetWare server out on the internet one time just to see what happened, and the hackers didn't have a clue as to how to attack it. They kept trying to attack it as a Windows server. So what are we going to do? What services are we going to do with these things? The other DMZ topology or other DMZ topologies. This one is a three-homed or a three-legged firewall. And this has become kind of popular. We have the WAN out here. We come into the firewall. We have the trusted LAN, and this is the don't let anybody in, and this is going to go to our web and whatever else. Maybe our mail server will be out here so that users can get to those resources. The DMZ semi-trusted, or I'll call it semi-trusted, and this one back here is the trusted network, where we don't allow anything to come through the firewall to get to our trusted network except the states, the stateful connections, the ones that are in the state table to allow the answers to come back in. Single device for this thing. I think that probably one of the issues may be if we compromise this device, we've compromised the DMZ as well as the private network. If it fails, both of them have failed, but we're going to create, and you can't get around it, we're going to create a number of single points of failures in networks. The other systems here, the most secure is a dual firewall. So we have an outer firewall, the WAN to go to the DMZ to allow some traffic in, and obviously all of our stateful stuff would come in. Stateful, can't spell it. Stateful stuff would come in, and then it would get past to this next one, and the stateful stuff would come in. But everything else is going to be rejected in the inner firewall. So the outer firewall, the DMZ, allows some traffic, allows all traffic to get to some resources. And again, probably things like 80 and 443, maybe 143 IMAP, 25 email. Those things we would allow in here because we may have those services running in the DMZ, a place where we want to allow everybody to get to a few resources to do those things. This is the small office, home office, and this is a caution. I don't remember if it was in the book or if I found it someplace else, but I think it was in the book. But the SOHO, the small office, home office routers with the integrated firewall have this option in there for a DMZ host. It's not a true DMZ if you're using this thing. It opens all the ports to that host at once. Useful for some purposes, gaming, troubleshooting, those sorts of things. But it's not an actual DMZ. It's still on your network. It's not isolated from your internal home network, from your private network. So that's just a yes, it's there, and yep, this is what it really does. It doesn't set up a true DMZ. A content filter, a proxy server that says prevents access to certain sites. Proxy server can do a number of things for us. A proxy server, and I don't know what everybody's ages are. You can see that mine's not young, but I went through the teenage years with a son on the internet. I wound up putting a proxy server on him. If I have my devices back here, I can have a proxy here that can either be setting in my private network or in the DMZ, and we'll put it in the private network here. And then we'll have our firewall here that allows the traffic to go out. What happens with a proxy server, instead of sending your requests to the internet, to the server out here on the internet in the cloud, and I could never draw clouds, in the cloud, we send the request to the proxy server. The proxy server then rebuilds the request and sends it to the internet. A couple of advantages here. One, you hide your internal IP addressing or even your NATed IP addressing because everything comes from the same IP address. The other thing that happens, prevents access, we can have, for lack of a better word, an ACL in this thing, or permitted sites. Where can people go? We can filter on words. so that certain words aren't allowed. The issue with the filter on words becomes if I filter out this character string and then I want to go to this county, I can't get there because this character string is filtered and this is going to be a denied. So this is another one that, yeah, you can do those things, but you kind of got to be careful about doing it. So I used this when my son was a teenager. I used this, and he finally got the message that I can go back and see where he's been. I can go back and see what he's done. I can filter certain, and you can't keep up with all of them. There are lists that you can get to do these things with. What do you want to allow? What do you not want to allow? The other advantage here is when the answer comes back, it comes back to the access control list. We can have antivirus software. We can do filtering here to be sure that we don't pass some malware to the individual hosts on the backside of the network. So proxy server does a little more than prevents access to certain sites. It does that. We can filter on it. It rebuilds the request and sends it out on the internet. We can have transparent proxies, and some firewalls run a transparent proxy to where they actually intercept and do that connection for you. Or you can have an overt proxy where you configure it in the browser configurations to go to the proxy server to do that. Network access control. Working clients go, this is a guest network, captive portals. Captive portals are those things when you go to the web page, says you're not on, and you go to a website and it says, oh, okay, what's your name or what's your room number, maybe if you're in a hotel, and do you agree to our acceptable use policy? They can be configured to have logons, and for a while I think the hotels did. I think they've all given up on that now. They just make you agree to abide by the acceptable use policy so that you don't do anything dangerous on their networks when you do that. But those are what captive portals are. Remote access, we may do a posture assessment, and what this does is when we try to connect the posture assessment, the remote access server, the thing that's allowing us to get on the network, is going to check the device, and we have to have clients on these things, software on them to allow this. We're going to check to be sure that we have an antivirus software. Check to be sure that the patches are all up to date. So we're going to check to be sure that we don't have a lot of the circumstances that I talked about that we worried about with the students coming in and just plugging in their laptops. Remote access, we can do some testing, some checking of the devices themselves. If they don't work, if they're not up to snuff, up to par for these things, we put on a quarantine network to allow them to bring themselves into compliance, that they can install an antivirus software, update the antivirus software, update the patches, do the different things that would be needed to make them safe on the network. Keeping in mind a remote access, when somebody connects remote access on your network, same as if they plugged into an Ethernet port on the network, they're on your network. If they've got a virus, it's on your network. If they've got a worm, it just got transmitted to your network. So we kind of worry about what goes on there. And there are, you say, well, it's not a problem because they have a company laptop which gets updated on a regular basis. And if that's the case, that's all well and good. But what if you hire a contractor? ECPI did that. They hired a contractor. She was in Texas somewhere and was doing curriculum development. Needed to get on the network. And they found out that she had a teenage son. And all of you who have had teenage sons or have teenage sons, it was dangerous. They couldn't do anything with her personal device. You can't make somebody let you check their personal device, and that's where the BYOD stuff comes in. Is it's yours, and we can't make you do things with it, even if we allow you on the network. What they finally did was they had to send her a corporate device, and once they got a corporate device, you can do whatever you want to because it's a corporate device. But those kinds of things, will happen to you. Firewall types, this shows proxy server. It can be, and it's sometimes considered an application firewall because it works with applications, but it is a firewall of sorts because everybody connects to it. It then does the connection to the internet. And we can have proxy servers going out, and we can have a reverse proxy. I think I got one for a reverse proxy here in a minute. Yeah, what a reverse proxy does, I said, we don't want to punch a hole in our firewall. What would happen here for this thing, if you wanted to do this, is we would have our firewall here, and somebody from the untrusted WAN, the internet, would connect to the reverse proxy. The proxy would then go into the internal network and get the information, so that these guys are not on our internal network. They're not connecting to it. They're getting the resources from the reverse proxies, and those things do exist, and some of them are open source, that they connect here. It connects to whatever the internal resources inside the network is, gets that information, comes back here, and then sends it back to the device. They never connect on our private network. So we have forward proxies as well as reverse proxies that work on the network. And then they have this, and I left this in because this is one of the exercises. If you've never done a Windows firewall configuration, looked at it, it's worthwhile to do that. You get the Windows firewall, the new Windows firewalls are a whole lot better than the old Windows firewall was when we looked at these things. We're going to go into some new things here now for a few minutes. We have intrusion detection systems, intrusion prevention systems. Intrusion detection systems detect systems as a special network device that can detect attacks and suspicious activity. An intrusion prevention system not only detects them, it can stop them. A honeypot, a device, is a device or a virtual machine that entices intruders into displaying a vulnerability. What they are typically used for, they're an intentionally insecure device that's put in a DMZ or on the network to attract hackers. And in the past, they were used for law enforcement, but the courts rule that that was entrapment. What they're mostly used for today is to study hacker techniques. What do they do? So that's a honeypot's an individual machine. A honey net is a network of honeypots, and a tar pit, sticky honeypot, a honeypot that answers a connection request in such a way that the attacking computer is stuck for a period of time. So we use the honeypots to actually study the hackers themselves. The IDSs and the IPSs, the intrusion detection systems and the intrusion prevention systems, are based on signatures, just like antiviruses are. Behavior characteristics of known attacks. We need those. We have those. Stateful protocol analysis. And it compares the protocol that's being used with what it should be used for. If we're using HTTP to do something really odd, the protocol analysis may be able to stop the attack. Some of these take a while to train the devices. The anomaly-based, heuristic is behavior-based. The problem with the anomaly-based or the heuristic is it's got to know what's normal. So it's got to be trained in what is normal on the system. We have those different things. And what we can have in the evaluation of the packet by these devices, a true positive. An attack occurred, was recognized, was dealt with. It may have been reported. An IDS, the difference between an IDS and an IPS is I've heard it as an IDS, an intrusion detection system, is a couple of workers are standing around the coffee mess or the coffee maker getting a cup of coffee and say, "Hey, did you see that cool attack yesterday?" That's what an IDS does. It detects it, doesn't do anything about it. An IPS, an intrusion prevention system, can stop the attack. It can take certain actions. As I say, stop the attack. It can shut things down. It can make modifications to configurations. Can shut down ports, shut down interfaces. So, and if you shut down the interface, it's going to stop the attack. It's going to stop a lot of other stuff too. But stopping the attack is the first thing that we want to do. So a true positive is there was an attack and we detected it. A true negative, there was a packet and it wasn't an attack and it didn't trigger alerts. So it was benign, no alerts were triggered. A false positive is that we have an innocent packet coming in, but it looked like an attack. That's kind of irritating, but it's not going to do a whole lot of damage. It may slow things down, not going to do a whole lot of damage. The one that's really damaging is the one at the bottom, a false negative. That's an attack happened and we didn't recognize it as an attack. It wasn't detected. So we got attacked, something bad happened. We didn't know that we had been attacked. The IPS allowed it to pass through, or the IDS didn't detect it and report it. So a couple of definitions. An IDS, fundamentally a passive monitoring system designed to keep administrators aware of malicious activity. An IPS, intrusion prevention systems, active protection systems. Keep logs, trigger alerts. They're defined by how they actively block traffic, disconnect users, lock accounts, whatever else that we allow them to do when an attack is detected. So an intrusion prevention system is an active device, process that tries to stop the attacks that are happening. And this is just an image of where are they. An IDS can sit over here on the side. It can sit in the switch and do a mirror, and do a port mirror where it's watching, it's plugged into port 24 and it's watching gig 01 or whatever else it does. So it's just monitoring what goes on. An IPS is in line. It has to be in a position that it can actually take action to stop the attack. So it's going to be in line someplace in the system itself. When we do, I got to find the right stuff here. Another image, same thing. Well, it's kind of the same thing. We have NIDS and NIPS, network intrusion detection systems, and network intrusion prevention systems, and then the NIPS, the NIPS is up here in line, the NIDS is down here hanging off the switch. We also have the host, the HIDS and the HIPS, the host intrusion prevention systems and the host intrusion detection systems. They're going to be on the devices themselves. So we can either do it as a network, kind of like firewalls. We can have a host firewall or we can have a network firewall. Different ways to do these things. So intrusion detection systems, passive alert, active is the IPS, the intrusion prevention system. Signature based, anomaly based, can be on a host or on the network. The signature based, the signatures are files that have to be updated on a regular basis, just like antivirus signatures have to be updated on a regular basis. An anomaly system, heuristic system, takes some time to learn what's normal. Once it learns what's normal, it can then prevent or report the attacks based upon the abnormalities. Anti-malware signatures, real-time antivirus protection, and we have that on our antivirus softwares, that if something comes in that is dangerous, it's going to automatically be stopped. We schedule system scanning, whatever we want to do. We used to schedule them just before or just after everybody should have left and we're off the systems. We had a policy, a schedule that we would run the antivirus software. We would then have all of the machines check to see if there were any updates that they needed to get to the operating system, or any other updates that might be available, and after that we shut them down. Malware removal, we have those. A browser email protection, file integrity monitor, a hash file. It's going to be watching for changes. So hashing is the process that we use in order to check to see if we have changes on our systems. So the next one here is called, I'm just seeing how far we got to go. Yeah, we're gonna get another break. We're probably going to finish this one up tonight, this module, and do the other module tomorrow night. But data loss prevention, and that happens obviously because we have all of these compromises that are going on. And how are we going to do that? How are you going to keep the network information, the information that should be kept secure? How are you going to keep it secure? We have flash drives now that we plug in. You can put an awful lot of information on a flash drive. Are you going to allow them to be plugged in? I think DoD has stopped allowing that to happen at all. You're going to allow people to get to their Dropbox from inside your network. You can send an awful lot of stuff to Dropbox. Are you going to allow them to use the corporate email to go to private addresses? Where are we going to allow things to go? What are we going to block? And that's what some of this one shows. We're going to have a DLP agent. It's going to be a data loss prevention agent that's going to be on the individual devices. And then the data loss server is going to be inside the network, and it's going to check the traffic as it goes somewhere. And over here, the webmail, it's going to block. It's not going to allow you to get to the Yahoo or Google or Gmail sorts of things. The supplier email domain, we're going to allow it to go across the internet, but it's going to be encrypted. Social networks, not a chance. We're not going to allow that. There are a couple of things on the social networks allowing users to post there. If you start threatening somebody, the company that owns the network that you threaten from may be culpable in this thing, and they may have some culpability in it. The other one here, going to the partner email domain, supplier email, partner email domain, we're going to allow it, but we're going to encrypt those things. So what we're trying to do with this down here at the bottom left is prevent exfiltration of data. Exfiltration means to get out of the network. That could be accidental or malicious. People sometimes give away information that they shouldn't, not because they're being malicious, but just because they don't know they shouldn't. It gets stuck in, they make a comment in a location that they shouldn't do that. So the things that might prevent forwarding email outside the corporate domain may prevent storage of email or permanent storage of email. And I said earlier that there are times when you, as the network administrator, are going to be legally bound to keep emails. The next one is the Unified Threat Management. We're coming up to just about a break time. So let's go ahead and take a break and come back at 10 past the hour. You have questions if you don't have questions. If you have questions, go ahead and ask them. Otherwise, let's take a break. So what we have here, Unified Threat Management, looks like the dream, right? And it kind of is, because it does a little bit of everything. It is a single point that we firewall, IDS, IPS, content filtering, all the things we've talked about, DLP software, a DMZ interface, a proxy server, a NAT, a VPN endpoint, anti-malware, access control, check as they come in, posture assessment, and that goes with the access control, where we check the posture or the configuration that they have all of those things. And then industry regulatory compliance checking, that we are complying with all of the things that we're required to do. I'll bring over one, and this is an older piece of software, been around for a long time. It's a Cisco device called the Security Device Manager, which was really built to manage firewalls. But it does those things. We have interface connections here. We can edit the interfaces. We can create a connection. We can monitor what's going on with the devices, or we can configure them. But we have the firewall and the access control list. Edit the firewall policy. Application security. What are we going to allow? What are we not going to allow? Email, instant messaging for those things. Yahoo Messenger. What do we want to do? We want to block it or permit it. MSN Messenger or AIM Messenger, AOL Instant Messenger. So we can block these things. We can send an alarm. We can send a notification for these things. If we wanted to prevent or permit one and stop the others, we can do that. A VPN. I'm going to discard the changes here. VPN, we can configure VPN site to site, easy VPN remote, easy VPN server when we do those things. We can do a security audit of what's going on. We can configure routing. We can configure NAT, the network address translation, where we translate our private to public IP addresses. Intrusion prevention system here. We can edit the IPS if we want to do these things. We have policies here, and these are all disabled. The global settings, the signatures, OS, Unix, Windows, iOS. Let's do Windows here. General Windows, and I guess that we don't have anything in here. You could get the signatures from Cisco for these things. Quality of service, network access control, and then we have additional tasks over here, router properties, access, DHCP, DNS, access control list editor, URL filtering, AAA, that we would use, AAA servers and groups, authentication policies, different things that are going on. So the unified threat management allows us to centrally manage what's going on the devices themselves. Try to stop this virtual machine because it starts getting crazy after a while. So UTM, Unified Threat Management, a little bit of everything available on it. Honeypots and honeynets. We talked about that, attractive to attackers. I'm going to try to start something here and see if I can get back to it. I was looking this afternoon, and there are some honeynets that are running, as long as my internet is working. I guess I run out. I told you that this thing does it, but there are some honeynets that are running on the internet that would allow us to see what's going on, what kind of attacks are going on. I'm gonna have to wait till my virtual machine settles out from the resources that it has taken from my device. Really want to do that, but it's the attractive to attackers. That's what we want to do. What we don't want to do is to make it too attractive to the attackers, or they think that they're being trapped, which they would be being trapped to do these things. This says that this thing is starting, but law enforcement, let me get over here, this is a real-time attacks that are going on, and this is the honeynet that's up here, obviously, because that's what everybody is attacking. Spaghetti Rat is remote access Trojan to do these things. So the attacks are going on, and down here at the lower left where they're coming from, the IP addresses that they're coming from, and what are they? There's a lot of SSH brute force going on here try to be able to do these attacks, to do those things. So there are honeypots and then honeynets, groups of them. There are organizations out there that are studying what these users are doing. You notice these are all coming from over here. Different times of day, they come from different locations. I was looking at earlier today that were sent from the U.S. and a number of them from Europe. Depends on, I guess, what time of day the hackers are working. do the system. But those things are available. You can look at them, kind of see what's going on with the system. But used to study attacker techniques, law enforcement for stings, but they may be considered entrapment. I think they've been burned several times on the use it for stings, and it's to the point that maybe we really don't want to do that because they're not getting the convictions that they want. And then down at the bottom, the service VNC, which was a remote access system around on port 5900. It's 38.6% of the attacks, and then Telnet. So they're trying to get onto the systems remotely using remote devices. SSH. The next one is NTP Network Time Protocol. SIP is a phone. HTTP, SMTP, mail transfer, remote desktop, SQL, and then Echo down here, ping. The different things that are being attempted on, and this is for the honey.db, and this is honeydb.io, not the one that I was on. So honey nets, honey pots, and then tar pits. The next topic, physical security, and this is one, this one probably, okay, I can understand that. I get doors and locks and things like that. The image is supposed to show what are we trying to protect and how are we protecting it. Policies and procedures, physical, perimeter, network, host, application, and then we're going to get to the data. So we're going to have different kinds of controls on the physical security. The preventive controls to keep people from going places and doing things that they're not supposed to do. These are going to be fences, walls, doors, lock cabinets, locked doors, those sorts of things. Detective controls to detect intruders, whether or not they're successful in bypassing them. Going to be surveillance systems, asset tracking systems, tamper detection. And then deterrent controls are things that are visible and meant to discourage people from intrusion in the first place. Warning signs, accidentals, visible cameras, guard dogs, maybe a guard themselves, discourage deliberate attackers in the addition to the detective purpose. So physical security, what are we going to have? What are we going to do? We're going to have a perimeter, and the perimeter, and if you did all of this, if you drew all of this up, you would probably have a building that looked like a prison. Do you need all of these things? Do you need fencing? Do you need fencing with concertina wire on top of it? With parking lot gates for people to get in? Specific approaches. The approaches is you do want to kind of filter people in from different directions on your network. In today's environment, you may need all this stuff, but the perimeter, the parking gates, the parking lots, the things that are going to limit the access points, perhaps, of where users go, the parking lots and the traffic flow that we're going to have in there. And then here we have building access, manual access controls. Are we going to have an open door, or are we going to have people buzzed in? Are we going to have man traps? And I got an image of what a man trap looks like here in a couple minutes. Or what are we going to allow? What kind of devices are we going to allow? And here we have approaches here and access points, but the building access, cameras on it, electronic access controls. How are we going to do? Are you going to have badges for your workers, and then they're going to have to be trained so that we don't get the piggybacking going on with them. Once we get into the building, interior secure areas, what are they going to be and how are we going to protect them? What kind of controls are you going to have for people that are there? You're going to have a badge system. What are the users going to do? What are the individuals, the employees going to do when they see somebody wandering around that they don't recognize? That's all part of training. What are they going to do with them? They're going to take them to the front desk? They're going to ignore them? Oh yeah, just so-and-so, I just go into the restroom, said it was okay to do that. Do they have a badge? What kind of security are we going to have? It says the senior executives, assets, control rooms. For the NOC, what kind of security are you going to have for the NOC? Are you going to have solid doors, locked doors? We did that and finally convinced everybody that should put one of the door handles on it that operates with a key from the outside, and you can never unlock it from the inside. It has a handle, obviously, to operate to get out, but it's always locked that way. If it gets left open, simple thing, as simple as a door closer on it, so that it always stays closed. But what kind of things are you going to have? What kind of cameras? How many cameras? Where are you going to have them? What kind of activities are you going to record? Are you going to record everything? Are all the cameras working? And it's kind of interesting if you just put the shells in, people don't know which ones are real and which ones aren't real. That can backfire on you sometimes. How many do you have? How far are they? We would have sometimes that something would happen. You could see it on the camera, but you couldn't really tell anything because it's too far away to actually be useful. And over there, lighting is a really big deal. That we need sufficient lighting in all of the areas around at night. Particularly people leaving at night, all hours of the day and night, 24-hour operations when we do those things. So the physical security, perimeter security, what are we going to do in the perimeter? Access security, and then the inter-facility security. What are we going to do in each of those locations to do those things, to protect what goes on in the system? And I've just moved this one to where it is. So this is one of those little kind of images here. Perimeter security, we're going to have some sort of a fencing, and this shows, barbed wire, and they probably want to do something a little more attractive than that. Even a low fence can be useful because it marks your perimeter, and it will discourage some people. It's not going to discourage a dedicated individual. And then inside of the perimeter, we're showing somebody doing a patrol of some sort. Inside the building itself, and this is not a really big building as you can see, but once we get into the building, the perimeter, we should have probably a reception desk in here. This doesn't show it, to allow you to log in, call down whoever's going to be your escort. The critical resources should be in secure areas within the building, normally in the most interior part of the building. And you have different kinds of access, different kinds of doors to get into those areas. Where can people go? Can they go to the coffee? Can they go to the break room to buy a candy bar? Yeah, probably going to allow that. And this one now we're putting a gate up around with the fencing and the guards that are going around these things. And now we have window placement. Where are they going to be? What are the window placements? Let's see. Yeah, and then we added the cameras. Yeah, thought we did that. So what kind of things are we going to have? Window placement. Are you going to have coverings on the windows? Are people going to be able to see in? Where are the windows going to be? How high are the windows going to be? Are you going to be able to open them? And if you're going to be able to open them, are they alarmed? If you're going to be able to open them and they're alarmed, who's going to be responsible for closing them? Those sorts of things take place. People come in, it can be a madhouse that's going on, and I think this is supposed to represent, activity at 8 o'clock in the morning, everybody trying to get into the system. What kind of controls are you going to have inside the building? Physical security. And this is just people are going to come in. Are they going to be badged in? Are you going to have the RFIDs like I talked about that we had? How are they going to be allowed in the system? We're going to have cipher locks. Problem with cipher locks is shoulder surfing. Problem with cipher locks, people share it. We used to have those at one of my commands. I was in the Navy. We had cipher locks, and we were between some other commands and the parking lot. And you talk about piggybacking and tailgating, and you go out, you come in, and there'd be a half dozen people coming in behind you because they didn't want to walk around the building to get to the parking lot to go home. They just wanted to go through the building. Or they would watch. And how often do you change these things? How do you distribute the changes to the cipher locks, the combination changes that we use with those things? This is a demonstration of a man trap. In a man trap, we basically have a door on the left, a door on the right, and we get the individual in the middle so that after they get in, they're trapped and can't get out until they are properly identified when we do these things. So when we do this thing, the individual comes in automatic with this thing, and then the door gets closed. They're trapped in the middle of the middle of the room here that can be used for authentication to allow people in. And banks kind of do this because they got outside doors and inside doors. I don't know that they actually use them and lock the inside doors and let the outside doors open, but can prevent people from coming in or prevent people from getting out. So we trap them in here. Once they've been properly identified, we open the other side and let them out. The card readers here open the doors to get them in, open the doors to get them out when we do those things. Surveillance systems that we might use, motion detectors, window and door sensors to do those things. I'm trying to get down to the slide that we're on. Door sensors, maybe I'm not going to get down to the slide that we're on. Pressure sensors, detect pressure, somebody walking through a secure area. These are some things that can be really significant. Tamper detection, physical security system is bypassed. Different things. The motion sensors and the cameras are probably some of the more effective things. And I think motion sensor lights can be effective too. That's one of the things that it kind of surprises people as they walk in and then a light comes on. It's like, okay, you've been detected. Window and door sensors, a switch on the door or the window to detect it being open, and where are they going to do, how high, kind of the things we talked about in the window placement a little bit earlier. When we see this thing, the secure entryways, what kind of locks are we going to have? Conventional locks, electronic locks, we're going to have guards, we're going to have man trap, we're going to have logging. What are we going to do? I was at a place one time, it was a home, whatever the salespeople are, that was a warehouse. They were showing us their new warehousing software and how they were going to become more efficient. They just let everybody in, but they checked everybody on the way out because they wanted to be sure you weren't stealing things. So are you going to check people on the way in, on the way out? Both ways. And again, what kind of locks are we going to use? Are we going to use cipher locks? Are we going to use physical key locks? We're going to use the RFID and the badges, and this one shows an RF, so that you come up to the door and you tap your badge, or we actually always had to get closer than it wouldn't detect them. We kind of had to tap the badge, and it opened the doors that we were authorized to get into. And then the man trap down here, the secure area, the kind of thing that we saw in that little demo that goes along with it. Securing equipment, how are we going to do that? Keep access to network hardware tightly restricted by putting access controls on server rooms. And server rooms, file rooms, telecommunication closet, all of the places that people can get to where the data is stored, where the communications are, need to be really highly controlled access to these things. Cable locks to protect equipment like workstations and lone servers. I can tell you that the cable locks on the workstations are ugly. We use those for a while, and to me, and it's going to be whatever you and the company wants, but it's really kind of a way of saying we don't trust you. And you know, these were pretty big machines. Are people going to walk out of the building with them? Yeah, maybe, but it's kind of unlikely that an employee would do that. Particularly, we have some of those other things like filter people to particular doors, filter them through the maybe a turnstile or something like that in order to regulate the flow in and out. Lockable tamper detecting cases to prevent unauthorized user access. The tamper resistant screws, the security screws, you can get those, and what they basically have is a little dimple on the head, and you have to have a special bit in order to actually operate the screw. Problem with that, you can get the special bit at the hardware store to do those things. Asset tagging, and this is one that you probably do want to do, to keep the tabs of the mobile devices, and asset tagging to keep track of all of the devices, where you can scan them into a database so that you know where your resources are. There are asset detection, asset tagging, or asset, I guess detection would be a good word, devices for the internet, so that you can run a scan on your network and see how many computers you have, what are the operating systems, how much memory is in them, how much disk space is in them, so that you can get a complete inventory, not just see that, yes, there's a box there, but did somebody, and we used to have problems. The reason we went to those screws is we used to have problems with people in the remote rooms stealing the memory out of the machines. To do that, what kind of things are we going to use in order to prevent the tampering that goes on with the devices? Especially valuable items, doesn't need to be online, doesn't need online accessibility, put in a safe and lock it up. Secure physical access to wireless access points. This is one, and I told you about the room that we put in. You know, did real fast with the wireless. Unfortunately, we didn't put it high enough. One morning, they came in and somebody decided that it wasn't fast enough, wasn't connecting fast enough or something. I don't know exactly what it was tall enough to reach it and reset the wireless. So now we've got a DHCP with a denial of service and all that other things that go on with it. All the configurations that we had done are now wiped out. So these things, the access points, switches are the same way. They need to be high and in a locked box as much as possible, so that the users can't get to them and they can't tamper with them. Watch the network outlets. Cables can be targeted even by an attacker. Outlets, the ports that the outlets go to should be shut down, turned off, administratively shut down if they're not in use. And that makes them useless if we do a manual shutdown on them, which says that, yep, you can't use this at all. Signs of intrusion and social engineering. Social engineering, we talked about. The way to combat social engineering is training. The way to combat a lot of this stuff is training. What are people doing? What can they do? What's dangerous? What's not dangerous? The reason that we get all of the malware and all of the things that are going on in the world of networking is because somebody's clicking on that stuff. And somebody's clicking on that stuff in a lot of enterprises, and what you want is people not to be clicking on that stuff. And again, that's where training comes in with these things. So we actually are, and there are 3 parts. I missed this when I did earlier. Set of questions here. Look at some authentication systems. And authentication in the AAA, authentication, authorization, and accounting. Authentication is when we prove who we are. We'll talk about how authentication systems work, single sign-on, PPP authentication methods, Kerberos, Radius, TACACS, and then 802.1x. 802.1x is kind of a cool protocol. It's not something that maybe you want running everywhere, but you may want running in specific locations for these things. So AAA, authentication, authorization, and accounting. Digital identity for these things, we're going to think of it as a user account. With the user account, we're going to have associated properties. The properties may be things like, you know, your name, your home address, your phone number, things that users may may be required at some point in order to do things or to classify users. In a storm area, something like that, you may want to let everybody who lives in a certain zip code or a certain area leave early because something bad's about to happen. Username and password is typically going to be the way that we do these things. We've talked about multifaceted authentications, multi-factor authentications, where we had username and password. We may have a smart card, we may have something we are, what are we going to use, and those would be some of the properties that are going to be associated with this digital identity, with the user that goes along with it. And then the permissions. The permissions in some operating systems, server operating systems call it rights, but permissions, what can we do? What resources can we use? Can we get to certain files? Can we get to certain directories? Can we use the printer? What goes on? And the logged activities is going to be the accounting. What did we do? There are a lot of different identity management systems. One of the most popular ones today is Active Directory, or Kerberos actually. Kerberos belongs to MIT. Active Directory uses it. Single sign-on, and the internet, Microsoft tried this with the Windows sign-on or whatever they called it. And Microsoft tried to do that. Google kind of trying to do that. You can log into a lot of different places with your Google identity or with your Facebook identity or whatever goes on. Allows a user to sign in once and use a whole lot of different devices that are available, then go from one to the other. That's when we get into the Windows world, that's what a Windows domain is all about. We log in once and then are allowed to use multiple resources on that network. Multiple independent services share authentication servers. We had, when I first became a network administrator at one of the places, had a Windows authentication for resources, home directories, applications, and those sorts of things. And we were running a Linux email server. And you would be surprised, you might not be surprised, but you'd be surprised how many people couldn't keep straight which was their username and password for the Windows, for the data, and which was their username and password for the email. And they would log into the data network and say, I can't get my email. Log into the email and can't get my data. So single sign-on, once we went to an Exchange server and we had a single sign-on, sign into Windows, get your email and get your data, did away with an awful lot of issues for what goes on there. Training issue, yeah. Is it something that complicates what goes on? Yes, if we have multiple sign-ons. Besides, it creates a situation where we need a whole lot of passwords. The, I guess, downside to this is that if your password gets compromised, then you've just given up access to a whole lot of resources. So all of security is a trade-off between convenience and security, usability, and how secure is it going to be when we do those things. Windows itself, we have several different account types. The local account on the physical machine, when you log on at home, you may probably have a local user account that you log on as. Maybe administrator, maybe your name, maybe you've got an account, your roommate, husband, wife, children have an account, because if you do that, you can have different restrictions on each account. So we have the accounts with a username and a password to do those things. A Microsoft account synchronizes across computers, and that's the one where you log into, log into Bing or log into Outlook.com, and it's going to then synchronize the information across the different browsers. If you use Edge, I use Edge. I put something on it on one machine and then log in on another machine. It gets synchronized across machines. It gets synchronized to that machine. A domain account, Windows Active Directory, we log in, we can have multiple servers within, or multiple resources, multiple servers within an Active Directory domain, and instead of logging into each machine individually every time we needed a resource, we log in once, single sign-on, log in once, and then we're granted access to all of the resources that are available. That's probably what happens to those of you who are at the facilities for LeaderQuest. I suspect you log into the computer, you can get to whatever resources, the applications that are on the machine, they get updated, maybe to certain areas in the file system, home directories, are able to then access the resources to get here, and then access the resources to get to your course material. Central authentication, multiple nodes communicate securely, and this is what the single sign-on is about. To authenticate remote point-to-point protocol connections into a network. Point-to-point protocol, remember, is a WAN protocol. It can contain authentication. And what this is saying is that remote connections into a network, we're going to use it to allow the connections, the point-to-point protocol connections to get there. We're going to use a point-to-point protocol to get there, and then we will access multiple nodes once we're there. Access the same resources from any node on the network. And when you do that, when you're at LeaderQuest and you sit down at a machine, you can get to the resources that you're authorized. If tomorrow night you're on a different machine, you can still get to those resources. Advantage to that, and we did that with classrooms. You go from one classroom to the other. I'll log in whichever room I could get to all of the resources that I was allowed access to. So we can do that with these things. Authenticate local users joining a LAN or a wireless local area network, so we can authenticate them. The difference between this central authentication and uncentral or non-central authentication, distributed authentication, is how many usernames and passwords you got to have, or how many places you have to configure it. If I have a bunch of Windows workstations that may be in a home network or a small office, one of those Soho small office, home office, then I need a username and a password here, a username and a password here, a username and a password here, a username and a password here. If I'm in a domain and I have a server here, and these guys are all members of this domain, and we'll draw a circle around it so that they are, I authenticate to the authentication server, and then when I go to get a resource, it checks with the authentication server and says it's okay. I go to another one to get a resource, checks with the authentication server, it says it's okay. So what I can do, and this is the authorization part, what can we get to once we get authenticated? The devices themselves, the central authentication authenticates us, and then it gives us a ticket that tells what we are allowed to do while we're on the network. The protocols that can be used: PAP, one-way plain text operation. PAP, password authentication protocol, very insecure. It doesn't encrypt anything, and the image over there on the right, the top one is PAP. Send a password, sends a password Cisco, and it accepts or rejects it, whatever we're going to use. The username and password unencrypted when we do this thing. CHAP, Challenge Handshake Authentication Protocol, is a three-way. We send the request, and actually we send a request to log in. We send our username, and it sends back a challenge, a random character string. The challenge, we encrypt the challenge with our password and send it back to the device, and then we either get the accept or reject on it. The challenge can be issued during the connection, so it's going to be a little bit more secure, preventing session hijacking or capturing of what's going on there. The MS CHAP is an improvement over CHAP, the Challenge Handshake Authentication Protocol. The passwords are not stored in plain text. They're going to be hashed. And in these devices, we have mutual authentication. Each authenticates to the other instead of only doing one-way authentication. EAP, Extensible Authentication Protocol, is where we get the ability to use the smart cards, where we get the ability to use the key fobs and all those other things for the multi-factor authentication that we may want to use. It also is the protocol that typically extensible protocol is going to be used in the 802.1x, which we're going to talk about a little bit later when we do those things. So EAP, Extensible Authentication Protocol. It doesn't mean that it's there. It means that it's the framework to support all of the fancy stuff. Kerberos, term that I used a little bit earlier, network security via a single sign-in method. Kerberos is something that belongs to IBM. It belongs to MIT, and to listen to Microsoft, you think that they invented it with Windows 2000. They didn't. It's been around for quite a while. It is a very secure sign. I'm going to show the process and give you a headache here in just a second. The nodes negotiate with each other on the word of a trusted third party. That sounds familiar, the trusted third party. That's going to be the authentication server. Down here at the bottom, we have an authentication server and a ticket granting server. Typically, down here at the bottom, typically those services are going to be running on the same server. The authentication server checks to be sure that we're who we claim to be. And then it's going to give us a ticket to get to specific resources. So once we go to the server, once we get the ticket, we go to the resource server where we present our ticket, and it looks at it and says, yes, you can get these resources, or no, you can't get these resources. A little bit easier than the older method, because if we have multiple servers, we would actually have to log into, without a domain, we'd have to log into each server in order to get the resources. No single sign-on before this. Actually, Kerberos, before this, Windows had an Active Directory that didn't use Kerberos, used a similar process, but used different authentication protocols to do that. So users go through the authentication process when they first connect, and then they can communicate securely with the other nodes. The Kerberos protocol presents their credentials and sets up security without further input. So we get this ticket, and this ticket's good for, I don't know, I think it's like 14 hours, 16 hours. It has a time. It will expire, but it's automatically going to get renewed. Kind of like your DHCP address automatically gets renewed when we do those things. Kerberos itself, some terms. The basic unit of Kerberos is a realm, although in Windows we're going to call it, Microsoft uses the term domain. Linux uses the term realm with these things. Every node is a member of the realm. Each realm has a KDC, a key distribution center, that distributes the tokens, the key distribution center, two components: the authenticating server that authenticates the users, and then the ticket granting server that provides the ticket granting ticket. Lots of tickets going on here. The ticket granting service validates the ticket granting ticket and then issues the session keys. And the session keys are good for that session. As long as you stay logged in, and I'm going to say 15 hours it's going to be good for. And then you go through the process to get it renewed. And the system will renew those things. So the process that goes on, and this one I said I'll give you a headache here in a minute. One, username and password. The second thing, the ticket granting ticket encrypted with a ticket granting session secret key. Message is encrypted with the user secret key, and encrypted with our password. Sends it back to us. What it wants to see is if we can decrypt this thing with our password. If we can, the ticket granted ticket authenticator encrypted session key message goes with the resource server and the lifetime ticket. The lifetime ticket is not for a lifetime. It is how long it's good for. And then it's going to send back, decrypts the ticket granted ticket, learns the session key, and uses the session key to decrypt the authenticator. Lots of different steps here. The client decrypts the second message to learn the service session key, and then after that we can get to the resources. A little simpler here, doesn't have all of that going on, but up at the top, I am user Sam and I need a ticket to get tickets, the ticket granting ticket. The ticket granting service says, here's your ticket granting ticket if you can decrypt this response with your password hash. Here is my ticket granting ticket. I was able to decrypt it. Give me a service ticket. Here's your service ticket. And the service ticket, here's the service ticket, authenticate me going to the resource. The service ticket is the one that allows us to get access to the resources. And I think 352 in the book has the process. I think this image right here probably the easiest to understand, and I guess I probably should make the other one go away without trying to get into all the technicals of it, because this is the process that Kerberos uses without getting into what is specifically in the messages themselves. Other authentication servers, we have Radius Remote Access Dial-In User Service. It's been around for a while. It's an open source thing. It's a WAN, wide area network authentication protocol that we use for lots of things. When we get to the 802.1x, it's going to be used there. We can use it for authenticating to a web server when we do that. I don't think she meant to do that. We can, a web server, we can authenticate to a wireless access point. You can set up Radius to be used for enterprise security for these things. So the Radius server can be used for lots of things. It's an open source software, which means that it's going to be a great price. What we use it for a lot in routers and switches is to use usernames and passwords that are not stored on the device, to use the non-local usernames and passwords, Central Authentication Authority, to be able to get in and do configuration on the devices themselves. So the process here, this is a NAS client, the NAS client. 2, we go to the authentication server, the access, and the user's trying to get access to a client here. Let's say trying to get access to a wireless access point, or get to a wireless router. So the first thing, we go there and say, hey, I'd like to connect. Here's my credentials. Sends the credentials to the authentication server, the Radius server. It sends back a yay or a nay, and then we either get onto the system or we don't get onto the system. Central Authentication Server. The other one is TACACS Plus, and it's got a name. It's very, very long, so that's why we call it TACACS Plus. It's Cisco proprietary. It's used in routing a lot, but it is a Cisco proprietary, although they've opened up some of it to things. And this is a comparison between the two. They do the same thing, they authenticate us, but how they do it's a little bit different. What protocols are they going to use? The transport protocol, TACACS uses TCP, Radius uses UDP. Authentication and authorization can be separated, and they're combined in Radius. The authentication and authorization combined, a single message in Radius, can be separate messages in TACACS. Multi-protocol support, Radius is IP only. TACACS, IP, Apple, NetBIOS, Novell, some things that we really don't use anymore. IP typically is going to be the one. You may get someplace where you're using AppleTalk. Novell's IPX protocol, we're very unlikely to see anywhere. Access to the router command line interface commands, not supported in Radius. 2 methods to control authorization of router commands on a per user or a per group basis. And then encryption, how much is encrypted with these things, the packet payload for TACACS, and then only the passwords for Radius. So 2 different central authentication servers other than Active Directory. Active Directory, if you're in a Windows environment, you're going to be using Active Directory. If you're in a Linux environment, you can use Active Directory also. It's not anything that is specific to Windows when you do those. 802.1x is a kind of a special protocol, and this is another one I've got, hopefully a demo that will work before we look at what's going on. A whole lot of what's going on down here. EAPOL, start, and all that other good stuff. EAP, Extensible Authentication Protocol, and OL is over LAN, and this is an EAPOL start frame. What happens is when we come online, this guy is supposed to send us a request identity. If he doesn't, we send okay, how about asking me for my identity? Then we get the request for the identity. We get a response here, and the response is Alice. The Radius then sends the authenticator, the switch that we're trying to get a port open for us, sends a request to the Radius server. It sends a Radius challenge message back. PEEP is protected extensible authentication protocol. And this question mark may or may not be used. And what PEEP does is encrypts the conversation here. Then we get a response back for the challenge. We're doing the challenge again. The response back encrypted with our password goes back to the authentication server, and then we either get a request or a success or a failure on that thing. Just a real quick look at what it might be, and this one says done. What we have configured on the switch is 802.1x, and I won't go through that because when you do Cisco, you can go through and do that. We're waiting for spanning tree again here, and let's see if we can make spanning tree work a little faster, and that's maybe or maybe not. Spanning tree, port fast, default. So now we have one of these guys is on and one of them isn't. The reason is, and I said I wasn't going to do this, but if I look at the configuration and show run, one of my ports, Fast Ethernet 03, is configured for 802.1x. And it's not starting. And the reason, actually it did start, didn't it? The reason it's not starting is because I disconnected it. When I go here, we'll turn this off, that we don't have a username and password, or we don't have an 802.1x client capability on this thing. So now then, waiting. It's not configured on this port here, so we don't have it. What I have to do in order to activate the port is go in here and put in my username and password. And on this one, it's class and class. When I do that, this is going to take a few minutes. It's going to start doing all that EAPOL business. It's going to go to the Radius server here, and there's a Radius server running on this server back here. So after we go through the process, the authentication process, now I've activated the port. So 802.1x, we configure the switch so that the switch port won't even come on until we log in. If we have 802.1x, this authentication protocol configured along with port security, both of them are going to be used. So port security is going to check the MAC address, and 802.1x is going to check our username and password to be sure that we do that. That's something that you may or may not want to use, may want to use in some real high secure areas, may want to use in certain areas of your network, but not in other areas of your network. But we have the authenticator. We actually have to authenticate username and password before the port turns on, before we can even get an IP address on it. The terms that are used in here are a little different. The supplicant is what we would normally call the client, the computer that's trying to get access to the authenticator, and the authenticator here, the switch, is frequently called the client. And then the authentication server is going to be the Radius server. It's going to be the one that will actually do the authentication. So another set of questions, and then we'll do labs. But what are the core protocols used by Active Directory? And I didn't say those real loud, so I will go ahead and do this. Kerberos we know. LDAP, at heart, Active Directory is an LDAP database. You have to have DNS, and when we looked at DNS, we had those SRV, those service records. Active Directory uses those. It uses the service records in order to find the Active Directory server so that you can authenticate. If you're using Active Directory, and we did for a lot of years, and I taught a lot of Active Directory courses, the biggest failure in Active Directory is DNS, not being able to find the resources. Kerberos rarely fails. LDAP almost never fails. DNS, yes. It's not working right. I've got the wrong DNS servers, typically what's going to happen with it. Or the resources aren't getting registered in it. Which protocol is more of a message framework than an authentication method in itself? Choose the best response. And this one, try a process of elimination on this one when you do that. We talked about each of these things individually. Which one do you think would be a structure? PAP, Password Authentication Protocol. That's what everybody's picking. It's the most insecure one that you can have, by the way. It just sent the username and password in clear text. So do you think it's a framework? I guess I'm telling you that's the wrong answer. So try another one. Nobody wants to try another one now. B, let's go with B, Extensible Authentication Protocol. We can put a lot of different elements in it. And extensible, this is the one that allows the smart cards, the fingerprint scanners, the iris scanners on the devices themselves. It's extensible or extendable, and it can extend the protocols that we use on the devices themselves. CHAP, MS CHAP, and PAP are actually protocols that are used to transport the usernames and the passwords, processes that are used there. Your wireless network is configured in 802.1x mode. What kind of server does it most likely use as a back end to do the authentication with? And I got some B's here, and I got B's on the other one, but B, I'm probably going to be using a Radius server. And actually, I think all of them that talk about 802.1x talk about a Radius server. Your remote access system currently uses Radius, but one administrator is proposing replacing it with TACACS Plus. What benefits might this provide? Choose all that apply. And those are things that would be from that table. And there are 3 answers here that they want. I think I got one C in here, less complicated to administer. Get a D, E, and an A. More secure, a more focused on user authentication. And how about better suited for larger networks? It's TCP, A, B, and D. Better able to support non-IP protocols. Radius was only IP. Yeah, we can support non-IP protocols, and maybe you are someplace or have been someplace that's using a non-IP protocol. I've been in a place that's used a non-IP protocol since about, I would say 1999 or 2000 or 2001, something like that, when IPX went away. So we have those things. It is more secure because it encrypted more of the information than did Radius. Which of the following is not true of a Kerberos network? Enables mutual authentication. Secure authentication does not require public key cryptography. KDC directly relays communications between clients and resource servers. You need a ticket granting ticket before you can communicate with a ticket granting server. You got a 1 in 4 chance. C, we'll go with that. You know what they told me in A school? If you didn't know the answer, I always dive bomb Charlie. I don't know if that works or not, but C, I'll go back to that. C, the KDC does not relay communications. The key distribution center is one that had the authentication server and the ticket granting server in it, and it sent us a ticket granting ticket, and we went through all the other stuff in order to get there. I want to stop here and do labs for the rest of the night. We'll do module C, and it'll be chapter 9 tomorrow night. Like I said, the remaining ones are not